Are you keeping score when it comes to your stock plans? Well, you should be. In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 steps to create your own stock plan scorecard. Why should you have a scorecard? Well, in 3 words, key performance indicators. Creating a scorecard allows you to identify and report on the ways that you evaluate your stock program. This helps you to track your progress and report on it up to your management team. It also helps you to identify problems. So for example, if your burn rate's getting out of control and that's part of your scorecard, it's going to be really obvious. It also allows you to align your entire team with a scorecard. Everyone knows what's important. And it also raises your visibility to your executive team. By using the scorecard to report up to your management team, you make it easier for them to understand what's going on with the stock plan. That helps them understand what you do and your team's role in the organization. When creating a scorecard, I have one word of warning for you, which is don't data dump. Do not just create a big complicated spreadsheet and send that up to your executive team and think that they're going to figure it out. You really need to be strategic about what information you present to your management team and how you present that data. So let's talk about my 4 steps for creating your scorecard. Step number 1 is to think about what metrics your executives are interested in. Because if you want them to read the scorecard, you've got to include the data that they're interested in the scorecard. So think about the questions they ask you. What data do they ask you for repeatedly? That should be in the scorecard. Number 2 is to think about what metrics are your executives not asking about, but you think that they should be, because that is also a great place to include that data is in the scorecard. Now, you've got to be strategic here. You cannot put everything in the kitchen sink in your scorecard. You cannot send up a scorecard to your executives that is 50 slides long. You really want it to be just a couple slides, maybe 5 at the most. I don't think you're going to get away with more than 5 though. So you've got to think carefully about what is the most important metric to put in your scorecard. And then now that you've identified the metrics that you should have in your scorecard, what is the story you want that data to tell? What do you want to emphasize in that data? What's the message you really want your executives to come away with? And once you've figured out what your story is, then the next step is to pick the right chart for the job. And you absolutely want to use charts in your scorecard. Charts tell a story. Tables and spreadsheets put people to sleep. So let's talk a little bit about picking the right chart for the job. So one type of chart that you might include is a pie chart, or my favorite, the donut chart. Donuts. Pie charts and donut charts are really great when you have data to present that adds up to 100%. And when the order the data is presented in is not important. So I have a great example here on my slide. I'm presenting data on the status of our plan reserve. All of those 3 categories, when added together, equal the total shares in our plan reserve. So they add up to 100% of a whole, and it doesn't matter what order that data is presented in. Now, I make a lot of charts for survey data, and when I do, I'm always very intentional about the colors that I use in the chart. And I've done the same thing here with my sample chart. So I've picked the pie slice that I think is most important, and I've made that bright orange. And that is the shares available for grant. And I really like this approach because what's going to happen over time is that bright orange slice is going to just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And first of all, making it bright orange is really going to focus my executive's attention on it. Over time, as it gets smaller, it's going to be really easy to spot that trend. And once those shares get so low that we need to request additional shares, it's going to be really obvious to everyone, hopefully. You'll also probably end up using a lot of column and bar charts. Column and bar charts are helpful when your data doesn't add up to 100%, or even if the data does add up to 100%, but the order it is presented in is important. And in my sample chart, I'm illustrating both of those concepts. So I'm showing our ESPP participation rate over time. It would not make any sense to report this data in a pie chart because you can't add those participation rates together. That doesn't make any sense. And we're trying to show the trend in participation over time. So it is critically important that the data be presented in date order. And a column chart allows me to do that. I like column charts when my labels for each column are nice and small. If my labels start to get a little bit long, they don't fit very well in a column chart, and a bar chart is going to give me a little bit more room for those labels. Also, if I just have a series of charts and everything's a column chart, maybe I'll just switch one or two to a bar chart just to make things a little bit more visually appealing so it doesn't look like we're looking at the same chart over and over again. Another type of chart that I use a lot is a stacked column or a stacked bar chart. What this does is allow me to take data that I would normally present in a pie chart, but allow me to present it in a way that's easy to compare. So in this example here, I'm showing RSU holdings by grant year. So for each grant year, what percentage of the shares granted were withheld for taxes, what percentage were sold, and what percentage are still held by employees. And if I were presenting any one of these years by itself, I'd for sure use a pie or a donut chart for that. But because I want this comparison, I've gone with a stacked bar chart. Now, what I could have done would be a series of pie charts. That works too, but a series of pie chart is a series of charts like that will take up more space for one thing. This allows me to just condense the space needed for the chart, which allows me to put more data in my scorecard. And also, it's kind of still hard to get that comparison from one pie chart to the next. With my stacked bar chart here, it's really easy to see that that red section there, which is the shares sold, gets smaller and smaller as my grants get more recent. This is also a great example of how it is important to really think through what the story is that you're trying to tell, because there are lots of different ways that I could present this data. So let's talk about some of the other ways that I could present them. For example, let's say that what I really think is important here is the shares sold. And the rest of it, my executives aren't going to care about. Well, in that case, I don't need this whole complicated stacked bar chart. I could just go to a nice simple column chart that shows the percentage of shares sold from each grant year. Now, one disadvantage of this chart is it might give my executives the misleading impression that all of the shares that weren't sold are still held by employees. And that's not the case, because there's a big chunk of shares that was used to cover their taxes. So instead, I could focus on the more positive aspect, how many shares are still held, and that I could still do that in a nice simple column chart. Although that might create the misleading impression that all the shares that aren't held were sold, which also isn't the case. Now, there are a couple different ways I could address that problem. One would be to just take those shares withheld out of the picture and calculate my percentages based on the net shares that employees received. Another way would be to maybe I just scrap the whole year-over-year comparison and instead go to a nice simple overall picture, which is just a pie chart showing for all of our RSUs what percentage are still held, what percentage have been sold, and what percentage were withheld for taxes. This is nice. It's nice and simple, easy to understand. We do lose that nuance from one grant year to the next, so my executives can't see that in recent years fewer shares have been sold. And none of these alternatives are wrong. All the different ways that I've shown that this data could be presented, those are all right in some circumstances. It's all just a matter of what I'm really trying to emphasize for my executives and what is the message, what's the story that I'm trying to tell around this data. So, I hope this has helped you to get started with your own scorecard. We have some great sample scorecards on the NASBP website. We'll include links to them when we post the video to YouTube. I leave you with this GIF of data from Star Trek, giving you a little link. And I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Heck, if you didn't enjoy it, subscribe anyway. Maybe you'll like the next one. Thanks for watching.